Hello and welcome. This is your host, Enrico E. Manalo, and I am joined by my very special guest today, Max Masure. So, I am, of course, the Chief of Learner Success for All Aces Inc. The mission of All Aces is to activate consciousness, catalyze critical thinking, and transform capabilities that advance racial equity and build resilience in organizations. As mentioned, I'm joined by my very special guest, Max Masure, an independent UX researcher, community centered service designer, and DEI consultant. Recently, Max has released a workbook aimed at helping people to navigate imposter syndrome. Max, how are you? And for everybody, this is the title of the book. It is You Don't Suck.
Hi, thank you for having me, Enrico. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes,
Yeah.
so glad to host you. So, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
I've been working a lot on the book, so it's now in pre-order, which means I done the manuscript and I wrote every day for 40 days to get the
Wow,
book ready. And now I'm in the editing phase, publishing all the steps to get the book ready to be shipped in early 2022.
nice. So, I'm very curious. What has the editing process been like for you?
So I am lucky to have a trans editor that is working with me.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, we work. We are going into all the parts of the manuscript, and he gives me some thoughts and which part should be first. And so that's super helpful because it's a book around imposter syndrome, and I do have imposter syndrome, so I feel like I shouldn't be the one writing this book. So it's like a constant battle into I know what I'm doing, and then I don't know what I'm doing, and so having someone who is like helping me, and its job is really to support me, is
Mhm.
really in those moments where I'm starting doubting myself. It's super helpful to have this person.
Yeah, I mean, just reflecting on the process of writing myself, I know that it can be a sometimes an isolating experience, and yeah, doubt definitely can creep in. So to pivot to our first question, and I'd like to kind of open this up for you a little bit. Um, I mentioned that you are many things, right? So you're a UX designer, you're a DEI consultant, and there are a lot of things that you do. I mean, you're an author now. Um, so with all those things in mind, well, what made you fall in love with what you do?
Yeah, so up until I was 36, I didn't really have that huge interest in diversity. I was feeling a lot of imposter syndrome.
Okay.
So I was not even sure of what I was into. I spent all my life agreeing on everyone else's thoughts and ideas, and I was afraid and terrified of disappointing someone. So I would always go into saying yes to make sure the person won't get a grudge around, towards
I
me,
see.
or wouldn't be okay with what I would say. So that you multiply that by by 36 years, and I ended up not knowing what I was into.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I say, yeah, and I say 36 because that's the age I finally came out as a trans person. And
Oh,
this is where everything shifted in my whole world and the view of the world that I knew.
that seems like I mean, I'm 36 now, and I've sometimes I feel like, wow, I think I know who I am pretty well, but then again, sometimes that doubt creeps in, and sometimes I find myself questioning, like, yeah. So I think I have a good handle on what I stand for, but well, as you know, even when you're doing that for the bulk of your time, for a large portion of your time, sometimes it creeps in, sometimes at night or when you're alone, like, are you doing the right thing? And then, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, so for me, this is where I really tapped into my inner power of like when I came out, I started to see the world differently.
Mhm.
So that's how. I was more aware of everyone around me as well, and this is why I sort of like issue around diversity and inclusion, and I started to pay attention to uh, different communities, and how that's how I shifted my career as an inclusion consultant, and using my privilege of being a masculine presenting person now, I see and I know how it is to live as a woman, and I
Mm.
know how it is to go through the world being woman presenting. So I use my new privilege and power to talk about that and to make room for underrepresented folks to speak and to use their own voice.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Of course, trans people are more visible than ever these days. And one of the things I've been very curious about, because I've always presented as male, although, as an Asian American man, I have not always been considered or included as being particularly masculine, and I've kind of grappled with that. But right now I feel at peace with where I am, and so I'm just kind of curious, Max. Like, what is that experience like to transition into power, privilege that you did not have before? Because I don't think that's an experience that everybody experiences, at least not quite in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember one moment when I really realized that I had a new power is when I was working. I was working at night, going back home, and I was working close to a woman, and it was early in my transition, so I was already masculine presenting, but in my mind, I was still doing the thing the same way. So when I used to be woman presenting, I would work closer to someone else at
Oh,
night to avoid maybe some people who would like to attack me or something like that. I would be very in defense mode. So
sure.
that, so like now I was masculine presenting and I was following this woman, and at some point she turned back and she grabbed her bag and started walking faster.
Yeah,
And this
yeah,
is where I was like, oh no, I am the creepy guy. I am the one who are actually gonna make this person feel unsafe. So this is where
yeah.
I started to like, oh wait, the world is not changing. I changed, and now I can see and interact with the world differently. That was my first moment of like,
Wow.
oh, this is different.
So, for people out there who are trying to imagine themselves in Max's shoes, let me try to maybe supplement that with some context from my own life. I do remember also quite vividly when I was, in that kind of transitionary period of teenager into adult. And I was walking back home also late at night, and I too noticed that there was a woman walking in the same direction as me, a little bit ahead of me, who started walking faster. And to be kind of transparent here, I had been out with some friends and having fun, and so the thing that popped into my head to do to try to positively address the situation was to say in a loud voice, "I'm not following you. I'm just walking in the same direction." And I don't know if that helped at all, but it was like I have no idea what to do. I'm not trying to make anybody feel safe. Maybe this will work. If I had to do it over again, I think maybe I just would have slowed down or something. But it's not something that somebody ever sat me down and said, "Hey, well, you're getting taller. You can go out on your own, and you really have to be aware of your impact on other people."
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that is I think it's easy to forget that while we are seeing people go through physical transformations, that there's a lot going on underneath that surface as well. And well, we all know what it's like to grow into adulthood and the awkwardness that that can present. And so to do it on some level more than once, I think is a real challenge.
Yeah, and that's how it felt like when I started transitioning. That it felt like I had a second puberty. So that makes sense that you connect with this story of you like getting out of teenagers and a young adult. That's pretty much what I experienced. But I'm 36. That's yeah.
Man, puberty again at 36. So, what is the connection between UX and diversity, right? So, this is not something that I'm always aware of in my world. So, I'm just kind of wondering how these two things kind of crossed for you. Like, what's the intersection there?
Yeah, so the way I see it is like user experience, so UX is about human beings. So
Yeah.
the experiences that people go through. So usually when you're a UX designer, you craft experiences and flows and what someone's gonna go through using your service or your product. And I see diversity as how we interact as human beings between ourselves and how we can create a community together, interdependent community where we like give and receive from each other. So I see user experience in diversity in terms of like how we craft the experiences all together. So no one feels unsafe, like we shared in our stories of walking too close to a woman in the street, and we can all address our own privilege and make everyone safe in our community. So I see user experience here, and that's why I started doing trans inclusion workshops
Hmm.
using user experience tools because that's how I see the overlap. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. I I am somebody who does not tend to read instruction manuals, and so I get my new thing and I like play with it, you know? And I can remember there are a few devices or things that I've encountered, and my underlying assumption was, well, human beings built this thing for other humans. So as a human being, I should be able to figure this out. And then trying to work whatever the thing is, it's like, what kind of human being designed this? Like, I don't know if we're on the same level here.
Yeah, that's true, and I think that's where you go back to testing. Like they might have not tested enough the right way to make sure someone can use it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, I think that often we kind of think of accessibility as being something in the realm of people with disabilities, but that's not actually the case.
Hmm.
If we take a look at things like universal design, it becomes clear very quickly that, oh yeah, a lot of the stuff that we have in its current configuration doesn't have to be. These are choices that people made and presumably other people approved because there's a whole supply chain and manufacturing process. So many hands are on this thing. And yet still we end up with things sometimes that like, they feel like oversights, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I like to share is the way we design stairs versus ramps. Like for people
Yeah.
using a wheelchair, it's better to have a ramp. And the thing is, like, it's better for everyone to have a ramp. Like, to be able, if you like, if you carry something very heavy in your own cart, if you break your leg at some point, if you have a stroller, like, a lot of people would benefit for having a ramp on top, like with the stairs with stairs and not just the stairs by
Mhm.
default.
Mhm.
So when we design for the person who needs the most, we design for everyone, and that should be the norm. We shouldn't like that's the core of the universal design is to design for the least the person with the more needs.
Yeah, and one of the things I was reflecting on as you said that, Max, is the way that things are now, right? We often see people complaining about the need to add a ramp, but that's just it. By designing it only for some people, it becomes extra work to get out of that, and that's a drag. None of us want extra work. So by
Hmm.
kind of being very considerate and thoughtful the first time, we can actually avoid extra work, which, I'm hearing my mother. in my ear right now because she often said these kinds of things, and I often ignored them. But here I am talking about these things with you today.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw those, but there's like some stairs that exist where there's also those stairs are like in the middle, and then on the sides there's like a ramp. So there's ways
Yeah.
to like, if we put the challenge as the brief is to accommodate like a hill that has to be climbed by people with wheelchairs as well as people without a wheelchair, that's how we end up with like a good product, a good
Hmm.
solution. But if we just say, oh, let's only build something for people who don't use wheelchairs, then that's a product that is not actually for everyone.
Yeah, and I did run across a set of these stairs recently, and I was kind of surprised that, and this is going to sound a little strange perhaps, but I was surprised that they looked so nice, right? So often on stairs, there's like nothing on the sides. It's just kind of a railing just because, and it doesn't look particularly great. But at this building, it was like all kind of integrated together and seamless, and it was a nice effect. So a happy byproduct, I guess. Uh,
Yeah,
so, you know, moving on into our next question here, like, so by now, a lot of people here in the U.S. and around the world are very aware of the existence of trans people and especially trans youth, right? So, lots of discussions about bathrooms and things like that. But I feel like it often really misses the point. So, what is it that you're seeing that people don't really understand about the importance of trans inclusion specifically?
it's hard to be in someone else's shoes, right? So it's also hard for me to be in someone's shoes that who doesn't understand the need for me to exist as a trans person, and for younger persons to explore their own gender. But the way I see is it's hard to explore gender.
Yeah,
And if we've been like into this very binary world, there's women and there's men, it's hard to get out away from it, and it can feel very, very scary of like letting go of a system that was here for us for so long and to jump into the unknown, which I did when I transitioned. And it's not for everyone. It's hard. It's like it means like believing in new, in abundance, believing in like something good will happen, and that's
mm,
not the mindset that we are told to have.
that's true.
uh, we are told to be into scarcity. We are told to be to do everything a boss going to ask you to do, or you're going to lose your job, and then
Right.
you're gonna be in a very bad situation. Which I would argue that there's a lot of other options than being under a boss that doesn't respect you.
That's true.
And there's something I know because I've been quitting jobs and I've been finding new and beautiful opportunities. But this is not what we are actually sold. Like being scared of taking a risk is good for the economy if you need to have a lot of employees who don't really speak up too much. So I think that all of that is part of like trans transness. People being trans are like breaking those rules, are breaking what we were told to be, and that's why it's a whole kind of worms, because it's like
Yeah.
it's opening a lot of scarcity that is coming from generations, and so it's in the body. It's yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot there that kind of comes out of simply questioning our assumptions, right? So
Mhm.
I, don't- I know that not everybody sees it this way, but in for example, I think a lot of people right now are feeling that it would be nice to have a lot more clarity about the right thing to do, be that politically, morally, what have you. But kind of from where I sit, if we can't be asking ourselves these important questions and creating space to really reflect on who we are, what we want, why we're doing things, well, not to be too extreme here, but some of this falls into the category of what Hannah Arendt famously called the banality of evil, right? So some of the dynamics that lead to things like totalitarianism, which we've skirted around very closely in this country, perhaps.
Mhm.
Certainly in the past, elsewhere too. But without this questioning piece, without kind of understanding why we're doing things, we can end up doing a lot of bad things very well, which I think is a scary thought.
Yes, I agree with that absolutely, and that's what I experienced too. Like even before I came out and before I started to work on my imposter syndrome, I was working in some tech companies and I was just saying yes to everything the boss would say. And there's like very unethical decision that were made where the goal was to make more money,
Yeah.
and we were very far away from building a fair and community-centered product or service. And I was part of the problem because I was saying yes. As a
Yeah.
designer, as engineers, designers, we have power of
Hmm.
saying no and to steer the conversation into, hey, what about the people who are going to be harmed by the decisions you're taking today? That means, again, being willing to take a risk because you might not keep your job. But again, going back to privilege, if you're like a cisgender white heterosexual man, for example, there's risk you can take compared to a trans black woman. And I want to take the risk I can with my own privilege and the capacity I have to take those risks with my life for other people who don't have the space and the privilege to take a risk to have a better situation. So yeah, we should take risks.
I have a lot of respect for that. And, as we're kind of talking about risk, my own field is conflict resolution. And there are many people who are very conflict averse. And in American culture, this is tied to white supremacy culture, right?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, a lot of the way that we do things for the sake of efficiency and productivity and minimizing risk. But it's through minimizing risk that we get the justification for things like redlining, or that is not offering people of color, especially Black people, loans so that they can buy houses, right? And that's only one example. There are so many examples tied to the scarcity mindset and people just wanting to avoid pain and risk and anything that can kind of make them even feel uncomfortable. And so this is why, at All Aces, we really see a willingness to embrace discomfort as being really key to personal and then therefore organizational change, right? So if we're not willing to take risks as individuals, then we're never going to be able to achieve those kind of risky things at the societal level, right? And yeah, we don't have guarantees, but we do have options, right? We do have hope. We do have, well, those feelings that come out of having risked something together. And as I reflect on my own life, it's when I've risked something with other people that it's really allowed us to get clearer on who we are individually and who we are to each other, right? So, for example, I wouldn't be in the wonderful, supportive relationship that I'm in today without an element of risk. And
Yeah, yeah. You said it like to be to embrace discomfort, and that's part of like what I totally learned and embraced is like when I came out. Like when I came out, I had to embrace discomfort of like relationships with folks were ending because they didn't understand me being trans and they didn't want to be associated with me anymore.
oh,
Uh, yeah, that's still part of like coming out. Is still not something that is easy peasy. I'm hoping for the next generation that it is, and they don't have to come out at all. Like they
yeah.
just be they are who they are since a young age. So that's something I really have hope for our society. Um, and so being okay with discomfort, I think it's a big step to learn and appreciate your thoughts. Yeah.
So I guess I'm very curious here because broadly speaking, we've seen people within that very broad category of LGBTQIA plus persons being accepted, but there are still some parts of that community where that are, maybe it's fair to say, less accepted. So I'm very aware that in that broad category, trans people are sometimes less accepted. Even bisexual people are sometimes less accepted. There's a growing awareness, it seems, of people who identify as asexual. Um, but yeah, so I guess I'm kind of curious, because there is diversity in that queer
Mhm.
community. Are there elements of diversity that you wish that people who are not in the queer community kind of understood better?
Yeah, and I want to notice that this week, I think it's the week of the month, I forgot. This is the bisexuality awareness
Oh, really?
week or month this week. Yeah, and that's needed. The same way trans awareness is needed. We have a few days like trans international trans days, stuff like that. It is important because, like you said, bisexuality, transness are not accepted even within the LGBTQIA community. And the thing I want to notice is like there's, for me, LGBTQIA mixes sexual orientation and gender,
Mm-hmm.
which are two different things, and I want to clarify that because
Please.
it's always gets confused. So the gender identity is who we are, how we present,
Mm-hmm.
and the sexual orientation is who we like, which is an external attraction. And those are like different, and you could be presenting however you want and be attracted to whoever you want.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the LGBTQIA means a mix of all because L is for lesbian and G is for gay, bisexual also. The three of those is about sexual orientation, while trans is about gender expression. So there's already like a difference in how we are presented. You could be trans and bisexual. You could be trans
Right.
and lesbian. So it's like there's a lot of mix already in the way we are presented. And the I is for intersex, and intersex we think it's someone like there's very little people, very low number of people with being intersex, which is like gay was someone who was born with different elements of gender, and
Oh, okay.
there's a lot of surgery practiced on babies that
Yeah.
are now more and more controversial, and that we should stop. I think it's California, they finally stopped. It's illegal to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but there's as many as you have as many chance to be intersex, born intersex, than being with red hair. That's the same percentage. Uh, and so that's not nothing, and we still have this stigma around being intersex. So same intersex being mixed with sexual orientation is problematic for me. Yeah.
Thank you for opening this up, because I have to admit, live on air, that that intersex term was one that I was not clear on. And in the past, I have certainly kind of caught myself like, oh, is that related at all to gender fluidity? But it sounds like maybe yes, maybe no. So yeah, I think, well, one of the things that I know that people complain about when it comes to the LGBTQIA plus community is, one, that acronym keeps getting longer and it keeps getting more confusing. And often I see people say that as a preface to kind of rejecting some part of it, right? So I'm just kind of curious if you had any kind of tips, insight for people who might find themselves getting confused, like they're not necessarily, or their internal feelings are maybe not like anti any of those categories, groups, identifications, but are kind of just feeling like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get this right, because there's a lot of stuff associated with it, and this is not my world. I want to do the right thing, but I just don't know how.
Yeah, and I think knowing the work you do with race, it's similar conversation than with BIPOC,
Hmm.
black, indigenous, and people of color. Is like, you, for me, the solution is really to use exactly who you are talking about.
Hmm.
So here you can talk about the trans community and the trans and gender non-conforming community, and even between trans people and gender non-conforming, non-binary people, there's already differences
Yeah.
around the issues they go through, and they're like targeted. So that, for me, what I don't really like with those terms, BIPOC and LGBTQIA, is like, is still center being cisgender, white, and heterosexual as the norm,
Hmm.
and everything else is other.
Right.
And I really don't think we should center white cisgender as the norm. We should have terms that, oh, those people are trans, that's the trans community. Those people are white, that's the white community. And yeah, that's my take on those terms that are like too vague and too big.
What I really like about what you're saying, though, Max, is, and I know that some people might take what you said and hear uh, white people, heterosexual people, cisgender people are not really part of diversity, but that's not what you're saying at all. And I think what I'm hearing you say is, yeah, if we center a particular group, whatever the group, then by default, we kind of fall into that binary thinking of somebody's in and somebody's out, right? But the reality is everybody's in, and it's not that some are more in than others. And that's kind of the thinking that we have to shift to, and that can help us get out of that scarcity mindset, that risk averse mindset. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, and this is all about assimilation, which I'm pretty sure that's the topic you're like very expert in. Is like, if you have one category that has been like defined as default, you
Hmm.
are either assimilating and becoming part of that, or you just not, and you're like seen as marginalized and not part of the main category.
Absolutely. And another thing that I was struck by in this thread of conversation is not too long ago, I was with a group of other DEI professionals, racial equity practitioners, who I was somewhat surprised were kind of very openly displaying their ignorance when it came to LGBTQIA plus issues, right? So their expertise is race, but it was really surprising to see that this group of people I was talking with did not draw parallels, right? So they were not seeing really like, oh well, the conversation was centering around pronouns, frankly, and they were saying that I don't really see the need or why that's such a big deal. It's not like I can choose to identify as anything other myself, right? And other than myself. And I think where this brought me back to is if we get too kind of comfortable in our own expertise and in highlighting the injustices that we see, that we're passionate about, it's actually very easy for us to replicate the harm that we ourselves are experiencing, but just across other categories. And so I was just kind of curious how that kind of is that something you've also noticed? How has that influenced how you think about things?
Yeah, it's all about healing, right? If you are not healing from your own trauma and your own way of being rejected, oppressed, there's a higher chance that you won't have the capacity to welcome others.
Yeah.
Um, and the pronouns discussion is very interesting because it should be nothing. It should be
Yeah.
very easy to understand. And some people get really caught up into not understanding, therefore I won't do it. But
Mhm.
what I really say is like, you don't have to understand. You have
Yeah.
to respect other people, and if it doesn't cost you anything to do, adding your pronouns on your LinkedIn, on your email signature, when you present yourself, it doesn't cost you anything. If, on the other hand, another person feel respected and included, that should be enough. And then that's not the way some people function, and I think that goes back to feeling that trans people should assimilate
Hmm.
while it's coming from people who have more knowledge on race. That's a bit, yeah, that's a bit sad and a shame that there's no way to make that connection, because I think there's a way to see intersectionality in the work we do. So yeah, I appreciate you because you're curious about topics and you're still learning every day.
I try. You mentioned as part of imposter syndrome, people kind of saying like, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing," and I'll share that among my team at All Aces, they're very used to me walking around, kind of just saying to myself or no one in particular, "I have no idea what I'm doing." So it's kind of a mantra. It's a little bit of an ironic one. I'm pretty sure that I do suffer from imposter syndrome quite a lot, but it's also in some sense me trying to remain humble and to question my own assumptions, and that only comes out at this point because throughout my life I walked around with a lot of assumptions and jumping to a lot of conclusions, and I just noticed that it brought me into a pattern of not feeling very good about myself, not very secure in who I was, and I just really feel like I'm a better person when I can get some clarity. And so that's why I really appreciate you joining me today, because of course your work centers around imposter syndrome, and people kind of think about imposter syndrome in the context of work, which of course the show is about. And so I'm very curious to understand better what the intersection is between imposter syndrome and trans identity for you.
Yeah, so for me, like I said, when I came out as a trans person, this is where I started to see the world differently and the world see me differently. And I also tapped into my inner power. I was
Mhm.
closer to who I was. So this is where I felt that I didn't have to prove as much as I used to prove to others, to prove to myself that I was worthy. I more and more felt like, oh, I'm doing a good job. I don't have to prove it, and I can actually say no more often because I was aligned with my mind, my body, who I was. So I think with trans, it's interesting with trans identities because we might have felt all our life that we were an imposter, as not being
Mhm.
in the gender that we actually feel comfortable with. And that's why for me that theme of imposter syndrome was so strong, and I'm dedicating a part of my life to teach around imposter syndrome and finding tools to like overcome it, because I really felt the shift drastic, drastically. I can't, yeah, those words I can't. Sorry. And so for me that's the transnet, and the imposter syndrome is very interesting topic of you have to be in your full self, in your true self.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what this is bringing up is when we're talking about pronouns, that's something where we can clearly see, oh, this is not about me. This literally is not about me. So why am I being a barrier? Okay, I can remove myself. When it comes to maybe a first step in pushing back against imposter syndrome, one of the things that we can say is, no, this absolutely is about me, right? And this is maybe one of the few areas of life where we can be sure in saying that. And so it seems like what we're talking about is the better you get to know yourself, the better you understand why you do things, what motivates you to do things, and what's gonna make you feel good about doing those things. And I think the pace of life right now is so fast and so task and goal oriented that we can really lose sight of that, right? So people do things like, oh, I want to get good grades, and they have this far off goal in their mind because that can someday vaguely lead to a good job, and I will therefore be happy. But what that doesn't consider is, I know these things about myself. I know that this is what's going to make me happy, and I know I need these things to be satisfied and healthy. I think that's
Yeah,
sad.
I have this tool exercise, a bigger exercise in my workbook, which is called vetting grid. So you like go through your best project and why those were like the best project you had and the people you work with, and then you can like the conclusion is you find values. So my
Mm,
value is like I need the team to be diverse. I need the team to see my me being trans as an asset. Like those are like the filters of next time when I talk with someone and they want to work with me, I can vet. Like, are they gonna be
mm,
inclusive? Do they already see me as being trans, or do I have to assimilate and hide that I'm trans?
yeah.
So, like making that list and having this grade helped me a ton about knowing myself. And like, it's not because it's a well-paid job that I should say yes. It's because if it could be a well-paid job, but I will have to make unethical decisions. I will have to accept to not be me as myself, to have this high pay job. Is it worth it? And you use the term being happy, like will it bring me some happiness or
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm sensing some real life experience behind the craft of the exercise, Max.
Yes.
And one of the most powerful things that I learned about that has helped me in my teaching and my consulting is that concept of looped learning, right? So some of you listening might be familiar with this. The single loop is kind of your reaction. If you go into double looped, then you're kind of reacting the first time. The second time around, you're kind of being more considerate, like, well, okay, so I reacted that way. Why did I do that? And then if you go into that third loop, it takes that reflective piece and then builds on it. It's like, okay, so I've reflected, and now what is it that I can do better next time? And so
Mhm.
that exercise you just described really seems like it's very much in line with that. And I am so struck as somebody who is consulting that there are so many people across so many professions, expertise areas that are so busy that they don't have time to even get to that second loop of reflective practice. Right? It's go 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 go, work hard, play hard, sleep very little often, and then at the end of the day wonder, hey, I'm making a lot of money, but why am I not happy? Why am I not fulfilled? Why does it feel like there's something missing? And it does seem like what we're talking about is that piece that's often missing is me, so to speak.
Yeah, and we make a decision who we work with or where we work at, and it's taking so much time of our life that it should be aligned with some of the values that we have. And so, and again, first level is to know those values, which is not easy if we've been like lying to ourselves
Yeah.
about what who we are and what we believe in just because we want it to be aligned with a boss at work or with authority figure, whoever that is.
So if we can kind of crystallize some things for our audience today, what is it that you're seeing that an understanding of imposter syndrome can do to help us to kind of, if not push back against those assimilationist dynamics, at least create some space for us to kind of consider what to do?
Um, can you rephrase that? I'm not sure I understood where you want to go.
Sure, I'll try. I guess what I'm wondering is, so let's say that I'm somebody who is entering a new job, and as you say, I want to be part of that group. That's why I joined. There are forces at play, so there's the social pressures for me to conform.
Mhm.
So how can I kind of enter into a new context and in a way where I will not immediately kind of start just saying yes, 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 and giving little pieces of myself out along the way.
I think this is where having a community, and I call it the interdependent community, which means like we give and receive
Hmm.
together,
Typical, yeah.
is very yeah, it's very critical because you might feel isolated in a new job, and if you're the younger person going through that, I don't have the support of mentors or like or friends, colleagues, where you could share what is going on, it pretty very easily the self doubt is going to be bigger and bigger. So I recommend to be around work to join some groups, some like specific groups, either on LinkedIn or Slack or even Facebook, of people going through the same in the same field. Or if it's an intern, you could have internship. You could be in a group with other interns, or having like there's a website where you can get a mentor. I know one is ADP, where you can find mentors
Hmm.
in any type of situation. I think for me that's one way to avoid the yes, yes, yes. I'm scared. I'm gonna lose my job to creep in. And there's when it's the first few months of a job, there's really a huge opportunity to set the tone, to
Yeah.
really not let yourself be like becoming someone who always says yes, but like to like, hey, I have my own skills, I have my experience, I have my expertise. You hired me because you want me. You
Hmm.
hired me because I have ideas, thoughts, and not just so I could say yes. So I think this is where there's opportunity that we miss if we're too into I want to please everyone. And as a ex people pleaser person in recovery, I really say that it is bringing a lot of good things and abundance to start saying no, and perhaps like get more of upfront with what you can bring on the table. Um, there's an awkward phase when we
Sure.
learn to say no, where it's like you are facing your deepest fear, which is disappointing someone. That's my deepest fear. Like
Mm,
disappointment is really something that I have a hard time to really embrace. That's my biggest discomfort zone.
I feel you.
And yeah, so but there's good stuff at the end of that tunnel. Like really, there's like light and people trusting you and the confidence that you could also work somewhere else if this opportunity doesn't let you space to be who you are and to have your own values to be respected. You'll have the confidence by doing that over and doing those loops uh, to at the end be like, oh, you know what? Maybe that's not the right place for me. And then
Hmm.
you could apply for another job where you have more knowledge of what are your values, and you can say, no, I will never work again with someone doing this or with that not being part of the deal.
Yeah, at the core of what you were saying, I really felt like there was this thread of relationships, right? And sometimes to figure out how to improve a relationship in one area of our life, it's a good idea to maybe start forming relationships that can support other parts of our life, and because these things are connected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing I think is very easy to lose sight of. So just kind of looking at the time here, I do very much want to leave space for your workbook, which is coming out, and that again is called "You Don't Suck." And it's all about navigating imposter syndrome. So before we kind of pivot to the exercise, I wonder if you could help our audience to understand why it's important to have kind of some structured guidance when it comes to navigating imposter syndrome.
Yeah, so I'm in my workbook. I use a lot of my own story and how I overcame imposter syndrome as an example, and hoping that will inspire others. And one of my realization is that when we've been used to always say yes and being a people pleaser, it is hard to, at the end, we are gaslighting ourselves. Like
Mm,
we are telling ourselves lies, and then at some point, so much lies that we believe that we want to say yes.
yeah.
But actually, this is not who you are, and we still say yes, and then at some point, we forget. We forget, do I want to say yes or no? So I think this is why having an external help support is helpful, like a mirror of like, hey, you're saying yes all the time. Do you really mean to say yes this time? Like
Good.
having that type of like conversation, and the workbook is that. That's the workbook with tools to like practice and train our brain to remember who we are, to remember that there's no luck, that you actually do the work and you know what you're doing. And so that's building that muscle of confidence. So then when someone is trying to gaslight us and try to say, no, you're not good at that, you cannot do that because you're not good at that, you can say, no, I know I'm good. Like, I know I'm doing a good job doing this or that, because we practice. Okay, I know what I'm doing, and success. I have a lot of success. We learn how to actually embrace the success, because with imposter syndrome, one of the effects is that we are incapable of celebrating a success, because we
Mhm.
believe that it's not because we did something right, but because there was some luck, or like someone else did something. That's why we got the success. So that's part of the tools that I do, is like owning the success and be comfortable with being highlighted for the success.
Yeah, these are all things that I have struggled with on a number of occasions. So I'm really excited about the exercise that you're going to bring me through. And with your permission, I'll just put up the template that you
Yes.
passed me. Okay. So hope everybody can see this. It says "You Don't Suck" by Max Masure at the top, and it's a little bit small, but at the top of the tree is a line that is labeled 5, and then it counts down to 1. So if you'd like to do this exercise along with us, I've also kind of prepared my own sheet of paper because Max is going to guide me through this. So Max, would you take it away, please?
Yeah, so you can see, so on the screen there's a tree, and the top one is number 5, and this is where the success is. And the tree has is going. We're gonna go from the top of the tree to the bottom, the roots. And the this exercise is for us to, first of all, you're gonna pick a success you had recently, something you're proud of, something that is really makes you feel like you achieved something. Can be hard, but you can, if you watch this video later, you can pause and think about one good thing happening to you that is really something you're proud of. And Enrico, if you can share when you found one.
Absolutely. I hope my mother or my former teachers will not be upset with my handwriting. So I'm writing with a marker. So it does say racial equity practitioner. So something I'm proud of is that I'm able to make a living in this line of work. So I'm going to consider that to be a success.
Okay, awesome. And you should be proud of that, yes. So the next step is you're gonna fill the number 4, which is what brought you to do that? What was the one step before that? What happened for you to do that?
So I wrote networking, right? So
Mhm.
to tell that story a little bit, I didn't know what to do with myself after grad school. And so I started talking to people that seemed like they did know what they were doing. And through that long process, I got connected with Dr. Martin. And she is really the one that opened up the gate for me to join her as a racial equity practitioner.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you've done the hard work of talking to a lot of people and then opened some new opportunities. I love that. So this exercise is taking you now to the step number 3, which is how did you end up networking? What was the step before that that brought you to this this step?
So for me, that was grad school, actually. And, I studied conflict resolution, which sometimes people ask me, oh, is that a real field? And it is, but it's often embedded with other fields. And so I kind of knew from the beginning that I would have to kind of cultivate my connections if I wanted to understand what opportunities there were.
Awesome. Yeah, and you worked hard. Like that's the thing with grad school. Yeah, and that's the same. You know, the drill now is like, what is number 2? What was before grad school? What happened before for you to go to grad school?
Right. So before grad school, I was actually living in Vietnam as an English language teacher. And it was good and it was fun, but ultimately, it was not intellectually fulfilling. And that's why I went to grad school.
Wow, I didn't know that about you. That's amazing. And then you can play one more step, the number one, which is the root of like your all your success.
Oh. So before that, I just had kind of a general desire. I wanted to help, but I didn't really know what I was good at or how.
Yeah, that's a good that's a good first route. It's like you wanted to help, and now you're like teaching people, getting them into moving and growing with a racial equity job. I love that. So I'm gonna ask you a bit how you felt, but first I wanted to express that this exercise is really to do that, to like remember that is not out of luck. You didn't become who you are and what you're doing out of thin air or like a magical spell somewhere. It comes from a long work and dedication and finding your own self. And that's the goal of the tree, is like to remember that we are like strong like a oak, like we
Hmm.
have roots, deep roots, and we know what we're doing, and we are on earth, and we are part of the nature, we are part of the world, and you do what you do because you worked hard doing that. So yeah, if you want to share a bit how you felt doing this exercise.
Yeah, I had a number of feelings, and one of them really was this realization of, oh, there are no accidents in this list. This is a list of my decisions and my choices, um, which really kind of made it more about me. The other thing that I kind of felt was, and it was a little bit curious, right? Like I of course know my personal history very well, and so there was this kind of tension in my mind of, well, we already know how this connected to that, but I'm more used to telling that as like a story of mishaps, of confusion. But looking at it now, it fits together very logically, and that was satisfying.
I'm so happy. I see your smile. I see how you feel grounded. Yes.
Well, that's a really great exercise, Max. And I really felt like I shared this with Max before, but I recall that when I was in school, math teachers would get at me to show my work. And it wasn't until I was a teacher myself that I realized, wow, students come to a lot of very interesting conclusions, and it's not always clear to me how they got there. So if I really want to help people to understand how to do something better, they also have to understand what they're not understanding, or I as the teacher have to understand what they're not understanding. And so I feel like this is a great tool to help us to stay accountable, right? I don't know that it's necessarily like an anchor, but maybe more like a lighthouse, right? So okay, if I'm trying to figure out why I'm heading in this direction, well, I can see where I've been, and that's very helpful.
Yeah, and for me, confidence is a muscle. So the confidence on remembering, oh, I'm doing this because I actually have all those like milestones that brought me here. Um, yeah, you can proudly be who you are. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. So Max, the last question that I tend to ask guests is in 30 seconds or less, and doesn't have to be 30 seconds or less, but what would you love to see come out of your work?
I have a very short answer and I can elaborate. For me, it's the liberation of underrepresented folks by helping them to wake up and tap into their inner power. And that's my like drive. That's my core. It's like I wrote this book for more people like me, people who are from marginalized communities, to actually get stronger and to get their confidence up and to really use their inner voice as their loud voice. And yeah, so my hope is more and more underrepresented folks and uh, people of color, people with disability, people like me, trans people, will use this book to get that confidence. Yeah.
I love it. And where does the title come from, Max?
So initially, I was thinking of "You suck" to be very provocative and to get people like "No, I don't," but I so I need the "don't," and in the cover it's like "don't" into brackets.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's for me what's my mind is telling me when I really suffer from imposter syndrome is like my brain is like "You suck." That's what my brain is telling me. So I was like, "You don't suck." It's the answer.
I love it. My guest today, once again, Max Masure. If you want to go to their website and check out the rest of their work or to follow them on social media, please do. And please do pre order your copy of You Don't Suck if you feel like you are somebody that could use a little bit of support in dealing with your imposter syndrome. Max, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. Any final thoughts before we go?
No, I really appreciate your kindness and your like yeah, candor into doing that today. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much once again. And we will be, the replay of this video will be available immediately. So if you didn't get a chance to pause to guide yourself through the exercise that Max was kind enough to guide me through, then by all means, please do that. And if you'd like to share your answers with us in the comments and maybe say a little bit about yourself, we would absolutely love to hear that. And we'll definitely be interacting with all of you in the comments in the future. That's it for our show today. Once again, my name is Enrico E. Manalo, and this has been another episode of Intentionally Act Live.